Hey, I'm Coach T. This is my C Sharp devlog where I'm logging 1 year of study. This is week 28 for me, so I'm more than halfway through the year, and it is, I think, week 6 of doing Unity solely in terms of my C Sharp practice. So it's been a long time, and this week I started working on some new design patterns. So I didn't do a lot of coding. We had real life. I've got more parenting stuff now that we've got swim lessons and ice skating lessons. And honestly, 2 nights I was just too tired to work. I ended up working on some art stuff and some 3D modeling instead. So that was a little bit of a compromise, but it was either work tired and get very little done, or work on something else and get a little bit more done where I needed to do some modeling work for a different project. So what I did work on this week though was I really wanted to start to understand the C sharp aspect of the Unity event system that I mentioned last week. I realized that delegates and events were up next in the C Sharp Player's Handbook, and so I started to work on understanding delegates, which making some progress. It's a little bit strange, and then also actual C Sharp events. So declaring like a new event, action, whatever on trigger, whatever. And that made more sense because I had had the experience with the Unity event system. So a lot of the language is similar or identical, and the syntax is almost identical. So that's really where I spent my effort. I worked through those 2 chapters. I didn't watch Christina's videos on them because they're much deeper in the course, and I just haven't been on Udemy a whole lot in the last couple of days. I took a pause from the GameDev.tv courses so I could work on my own stuff, and that's really the only coding that I did this week was working on my own control scheme and getting ray tracing, gunfire working, and really basic rudimentary movement mechanics. So the control feels really good now. The issue that I ran into is at some point I changed a setting on the camera, and now when I start moving, there's a like maybe a 10-degree tilt of the camera when the Cinemachine camera starts moving. And I haven't figured out exactly where I introduced that or how to fix it. I did research Cinemachine a whole bunch this week too. I watched a couple videos on it, I read, and then I ended up playing with it and then reading about settings that I was tinkering with, trying to chase this very slight tilt out. It's not something I've dealt with before. It's almost like it wants to start to swing behind the character when it starts moving, and then it hits a dead zone. So it's frustrating, but the control scheme itself feels really good. Now I'd compare it to Halo Spartan Assault or Helldivers 1, the original one, which is a top-down shooter, or I think it's called Red Solstice. I always forget the name of this game, but I enjoyed it when I played it. So it's a twin-stick shooter. I've shown it a little bit here, but basically you're at back pretty far, and it looks like a mini because I like playing miniature games. So this is a Jump Assault Primaris Marine, I think. And I wanted to. My goal is to give the feeling of bringing one of the tabletop games that I helped design to life, giving you control over the mini itself. That's animated. It kind of looks hand painted, and then you go on short, brief missions with it. That's kind of the experience that I want to give players with this. So I've got a long way to go, but I'm enjoying each step. I'm just trying not to rush it because I can get obsessive and myopic, and my kids are more important, my work is more important, my wife is more important, and so I'm just trying to take it slowly so I really understand what I'm doing, each layer, and then whenever I hit something that seems relevant to really learning more about, like the input system or delegates or events or the animator even, pausing and then really reading and researching and understanding it. So this process of trying to learn Unity, not to jam a game out to market, but just to make an experience that I want to play, working at my own pace, is giving me the time to learn C Sharp by Unity, but also to learn the Unity interface. And I think it's called the Unity API, but I don't think API is quite the right term for it. I think it's too big for an API. So, whatever, learning to communicate with the Unity system using C Sharp. So like today I'm going to work on a basic state machine that's programmatic, not a monobehavior script in Unity or not a scriptable object, but just C Sharp programmatic using an I state behavior machine that I'm going to build. I've got it mapped out. So other than that, it's not a big progress week. It's a lot of little refinement week. I spent a lot of time with that controller, like I said, really trying to pin down just the right movement speed, rotation speed, getting the shooting to feel a little bit chunky and good. Not too many bullets at a time, for example, making sure that there's good feedback. I did design a 3-component weapon prefab that has the weapon holder so it can hold multiple weapons at once, and it stores instances of those weapons. And then the weapon script itself, and the weapon script sends events out to a weapon listener, and the weapon listener then provides audio to an audio source. So that way, the separation of concerns is the weapon, like weapon input for the holder, and then weapon logic for the individual weapon, and then weapon sound effects is in its own contained thing. And that really worked for debugging some issues that I ran into. I don't have a lot in the way of animations on them. I borrowed some stuff from Mixamo. I might have to animate things on my own. I'm using a pre-made character model, as you saw last week. But I did make tracer fire and particle effects, and those are pretty nice for a prototype. They're definitely not production quality or anything like that, but I wouldn't expect that out of like 6 to 7 weeks of focus practice. That would be ridiculous. But they work. So every time you fire a shot right now, there's a 90% chance it fires a tracer round. That way you can see where you're shooting almost all the time. And the main rifle that is just the kind of bog standard assault rifle fires one shot every 0.15 seconds, which feels good. 0.25 felt a little too slow. 0.1 felt a little too fast. 0.15 is kind of that sweet spot. And then reloading takes a second and a half. I did that with a coroutine. There's no animation, but it does play a couple different sound effects in sync. I just got to sync the sound effects up to an animation, and I just don't have an animation at this point. So that it did raise a couple of issues, like how do I, when I swap a weapon, right? Let's say I'm going from an assault rifle pose to a pistol pose. How do I get the hands to match the weapon? I don't know. It's something to do with IK bones, and that's knowledge out of me working with Blender for the better part of a year now. About a year now. And I just don't know how to programmatically deal with that in Unity yet. But it's not a pressing immediate issue unless I'm collecting technical debt. It's a down the line issue once I understand more about how to put the game together. So speaking of technical debt, I did also start learning new design patterns, and I'm going to wrap the video up in the next couple minutes here. But I started looking really closely at the observer pattern, and that kind of grew out of learning about, I wouldn't say I learned them, but learning about delegates and the event system. It immediately came up in the C# Player's Handbook. This is the observer pattern, and I recognized that from an O'Reilly text on data patterns that I had, but at the time that I read that chapter, I didn't have the acumen to understand really what the O'Reilly book was talking about. So now, months later, with thousands or tens of thousands of lines of more code under me and looking at other solutions and looking at the Unity editor, now I understand the benefit of having the subscriber and listener model, or the subscription and listener model. So that's basically how I built my weapon. Is there's listener, which is the weapon FX system, the weapon listener, and then there's the thing being subscribed to, which is the weapon script itself. And that way the weapon holder doesn't have to deal with any of the logic on the sound effects. It's just when it fires. And that took a little bit of play for me to realize that if the weapon holder had the logic, then I'd have to have custom shooting logic for beam weapons or automatic weapons or burst fire or whatever. So I got practice in separating that out, and the result is a nice clean modular system. Definitely could be improved. I'm not always sure when to instance an object within a script versus using the Unity editor for composition. So there's room to grow, there's room to learn, but that's kind of it. So week 28 was a refinement week. It was kind of a slower week. I got to put to work some of my 3D modeling skills, which is always fun. I did play around a little bit more with the idea of making a C# beginner course. I think I'm going to do it. This does feel like a good time for me to start to go back to some of the basics to learn by or review by teaching. And I'm going to aim to have them be like 3 to 4 minute long videos, maybe once a week. The initial launch of the course might be, I don't know, 5 or 6 videos in close succession, like maybe 2 a day for a couple of days. And then after that, it'll slow down to 1 per week. And what I really want to get at is like the basic syntax, because I spend some time on the C Sharp and Unity subreddits every day, just looking at different threads. There's some games that are being shown off that I'm looking forward to playing because they look cool and I'm getting to see them in development. And then there's always like beginner and advanced questions, and sometimes I'm just looking for an answer for something. So I spend some time in the subreddit, and there's always these like fundamental low level questions that I think most courses don't totally grasp why people have these questions, but I remember why I had those questions. So I'm going to take a crack at trying to answer those with a C Sharp beginner course, the way that I did with the Python course, where it works from lower level up. There's thinking about doing this too is maybe think, there's a couple things I don't totally understand. Like I don't totally understand dependency injection versus inversion. I get injection when I'm creating a dependency that now one class depends on another. The inversion part, I don't totally understand. So that's something that like way down the line, I'm going to have to deal with. I'm going to have to grapple with that probably sooner than later. But in a video, it won't matter if I'm going through basic data types and syntax and stuff like that. So that's something to look forward to. I got to find time to actually record it. I tend to do them in bursts. So I'll write the scripts or write the course notes for like 10 or 20 videos all at once, and then I'll record them in really short succession. So I'm gonna give that a crack this month. This feels like a good month. We're in January. It's the beginning of a new thing, and yeah. So that's I guess if you want to do C Sharp with me, with Coach T, I'm gonna work through it from the beginning, and I'm also gonna talk about resources for you to learn independently, because that's another thing that comes up a whole lot is like, how do I start? Where do I learn? Well, I've looked at like probably a dozen, 2 dozen different beginner resources, and I've got some thoughts as an instructional coach, as a pedagogical and andragogical expert. I have some thoughts about what works and what doesn't work. So that's it. That's something to look forward to. Maybe by the end of the month, I might have the first couple of those up. I got to get going, though, because I believe I'm going sledding, and that's exciting. So I will see you next week. Hopefully I've got some tutorial stuff, not tutorial, some gameplay prototype stuff to show off. Or maybe I've made some more progress really grokking what delegates do, and maybe I've written a new script to play with them. I don't know. We'll see where we're at. So that's it. Keep going forward. If 2025 is your year to learn to code, stick with me. I've got Python videos. I'm going to have some C# videos coming up, I guess. And we're trying to build something cool in 2025. So that's it. Subscribe to the channel if you like this kind of thing. Otherwise, thanks for listening, and I will catch you next week.